I have the honour to introduce today's platform party. Dr. Orla Flynn, President. Mrs. Robinson. Ms. Maura McNally, Chair of the ATU Governing Body. Dr. Billy Bennett, Vice President for Academic Affairs and Registrar. Dr. Justin Kerr, Vice President Mayo Campus and Head of School of Health Science, Wellbeing and Society. We also extend a warm welcome to our students, the staff of ATU, along with our visiting presidents of Irish universities and institutes. Irim are Dr. Justin Kerr, on Las Uachtaráin, ATU Mayo. I call upon Dr. Justin Kerr, Vice President ATU Mayo Campus and Head of School of Health Science, Wellbeing and Society, to open the ceremony.
Good afternoon, esteemed guests, faculty, students, and most importantly, our honoree, Mrs. Mary Robinson. It is both an honour and a privilege to welcome you all to this momentous occasion as we confer an honorary doctoral degree upon one of Ireland's most inspiring and impactful leaders. Today, we recognise not only her extraordinary career, but also her unwavering commitment to justice, human rights, and climate advocacy. A legacy that resonates deeply with the values of Atlantic Technological University. Mary Robinson has been a trailblazer throughout her life and is renowned for her tireless work in climate justice, human rights, and ethical leadership. Currently an adjunct professor for climate justice at Trinity College Dublin and a member of the Elders, she previously served as President of Ireland 1990 to 1997 and as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights 1997 to 2002. Among her many accolades, she has received the Presidential Medal of Freedom from US President Barack Obama and has had influential roles including UN Secretary General's Special Envoy for Climate Change. As we celebrate today, we are reminded that education and leadership can be transformative forces. Mrs. Robinson, your achievements have inspired countless individuals to believe in the power of leadership and purpose. Your work exemplifies the values we seek to instill in our students: courage, fearlessness, and an unwavering commitment to making a difference. On behalf of the entire ATU community, congratulations on this well-deserved recognition. We are deeply proud to honour your remarkable contributions and to do so, if I may use your own words, in your beloved Mayo. And we are grateful for your continued example of what it means to lead with heart and integrity. Thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. I now call upon Ms. Maura McNally, SC, Chair of ATU Governing Body, to introduce and commend Mary Robinson for the award of Honorary Doctorate.
Good afternoon, President Robinson. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And I could start by going doctor, 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 but we won't go through that particular joke. It's a great honour for me to stand here today and commend Mrs. Mary Robinson to an honorary doctorate from ATU here in her home county. Tomorrow, 34 years ago, was the commencement of her Irish presidency. At the time, I was a law student in the King's Inns training to become a barrister, and she led the way not only for young barristers, but particularly for young female barristers and for all young women throughout Ireland at that time, but also now. She's been a lecturer, she's been a senator, a barrister, a human rights activist, and an environmental campaigner. And the mix between human rights and environmentalism is something that is inextricably linked. You cannot have one without the other. She led the way in fighting for freedoms in this country, for fighting for human rights for her clients, in fighting for human rights for the people of Ireland. And she has since then led the way in fighting for human rights for people on this planet. And by that, I don't just mean social housing, I don't just mean clean air. I don't just mean shelter. I don't just mean food. I don't just mean clean air. I don't just mean having a clean environment and a clean planet on which we live. But she has brought to our attention, and more particularly to the attention of the next generation and the generation thereafter, of the fact that you cannot have human rights unless you have climate rights. She has brought them to our attention. She has brought them to global attention. She has fought on her own behalf and on our behalf. She has spoken on behalf of those who do not have a voice. She has been the voice for those who have gone unheard. She has spoken for those who have remained silent for decades and generations. She speaks on behalf of the millions who are impoverished, the millions who suffer at the hands of global imperialism and global greed. She has, from here in the county of Mayo, brought to global attention not only the need, but also the right to have a clean environment. And in a way, being back here in Mayo, and I don't just mean seeing a lot of red and green throughout the audience, her home colours of County Mayo, but here at ATU, we have a huge interest in environmental rights and interests. We have here a green flag campus at ATU in Castlebar, the first technological institution to receive green flag status in the world. So it is proper and just that the person who has made green rights the most prominent need and requirement of our generation and the next generation, that I would commend to you, Mrs. Mary Robinson, to receive an honorary doctorate. Mrs. Robinson, thank you so much for everything you have done.
I call upon Dr. Orla Flynn, President of Atlantic Technological University, to confer upon Mary Robinson the inaugural Honorary Doctorate of Atlantic Technological University, and I ask Billy Bennett, Vice President for Academic Affairs and Registrar, to present the candidate.
Uachtarán, de bhua an údarás atá dilsethe in Ollscoil Technoliacht an Atlantic, ag a cóirla acadúil agus fofa ag a bord rialathe, cuireann Mary Robinson I láthair dit, onas gom runfor dachtúracht ilí irthaí, mar ahantais herbhís an de bhachtaní dar Ollscoil agus don pobal I Gwichana. President, by virtue of the authority vested in Atlantic Technological University, by its academic council and approved by its governing body, I present to you Mary Robinson to be conferred with the award of Honorary Doctorate in recognition of the awardee's service to our university and to the wider community.
Gacom le mulla chorla chadúil, Ollscoil Technoliacht an Atlantic, agus a bord rialathe, agus bronna mantedal, doctoracht einig Mary Robinson. I accept the recommendation of Atlantic Technological University's Academic Council and its governing body and award the title of Honorary Doctorate to Mrs. Mary Robinson.
President of ATU, presidents of other technological colleges, universities in Ireland, faculty and students of ATU, ladies and gentlemen, it's always a special honour to receive an honorary degree from a university. But I'm particularly pleased to receive this degree because the Atlantic Technological University is one that also covers my county of Mayo. And it took a little while for this ceremony to be arranged with mutual convenience, if I could put it that way. And I realised that it could have happened in Donegal, it could have happened in Sligo, it could have happened in Galway, it could even have happened in Limerick. Oh, no, sorry, in Leitrim. But happily, it has happened in Mayo. And I'm very grateful for that, to be here in Castlebar and to have so many memories of the earlier legs of the stool that formed this technological university. As you know, I have been working on human rights for a good deal of my life. In fact, I learned about human rights wedged between those four brothers, one of whom is here today, Adrian, my youngest brother, and his wife, Ruth. I'm very happy to see them here. But Adrian will remember... Adrian will remember that I learned my human rights and my gender equality and my using my elbows from having those four brothers. You know, they were a very early lesson. But looking back over that long period, I have to say this is possibly the most difficult time that I can ever remember for human rights at every level. Human rights in community, human rights regionally, human rights nationally, human rights internationally. It's a very difficult time because the messaging is becoming confused, if I could put it that way. And I want to assert human rights is not becoming confused. There is a truth in human rights. Very soon, on the 10th of December, we will mark the annual anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I remember when I served as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights from 1997 to 2002, I had particular responsibility for that Universal Declaration. Indeed, in 1998, we marked the 50th anniversary. And it is a very powerful document. It's a very simple document, written in simple language. And the first phrase of it, basically, in Article 1 is, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. And that's a very powerful statement, which still isn't true enough. But it's our responsibility to continue to make it true and to believe in it and to believe in international human rights. There are two simple stories that I want to tell. Well, maybe not so simple. One is a rather negative one in the sense of the difficult times, and the other one is a more positive one, which I will come to. The difficult one begins with, in particular, the war in Ukraine in February 2022, an aggressive war in Europe where Russia invaded Ukraine contrary to the UN Charter and has inflicted huge human suffering, death, injuries, but also huge environmental damage, which I happen to have personal insight into because I was asked to serve on a task force on environmental damage, on the cost to Ukraine, but also the responsibility for that damage and building back green. These were the three parts of our task force on the environmental situation. And I went twice to Kyiv and took that long train journey, about 9 hours by train, to get to Kyiv itself. And we were shown very sophisticated videos of the extent of that damage, of the work being done by the Chief Prosecutor in close liaison with the International Criminal Court, and also the ideas for green recovery. And when President Putin was indicted, in fact, for the kidnapping and taking of so many Ukrainian children into Russia, the United States and Europe and other parts of the world, but particularly the United States and Europe, welcomed that indictment. And now I come to the worry about double standards, because I want to also reference another war which occurred after the terrible attacks and hostage-taking on the 7th of October 2023 by Hamas. The disproportionate response to that by Israel raised very serious human rights issues. And at a very early stage, the elders that I was chair of at the time, we issued a strong statement calling on the United States and other countries that were providing weapons to Israel to use their leverage to ensure that they would not continue to provide the weapons so that it would reduce the toll of death and suffering. Unfortunately, that did not happen because of double standards, because of a blindness to what was happening, because of whatever the reasons. And then we got another situation when the International Criminal Court subsequently indicted Prime Minister Netanyahu and his defense minister. This too, instead of being welcomed as Putin's indictment had been welcomed, was certainly very much disregarded by President Biden, but also by several European countries in different kind of language. And now we see that in the making peace, the ceasefire with Lebanon, that France has somehow changed its position and feels that maybe Netanyahu has immunity because Israel is not a member of the International Criminal Court. That actually is not in accordance with France's obligations, but political muscle has rendered it a problem, as I say. So we are in a time when young people are looking at the world and saying, what is true now? What is true about international human rights? And I suppose the message that I want to convey very strongly, particularly to young people, is international human rights law and standards continue and must be upheld fully. The fact that they are not from time to time, the fact that we have double standards from time to time, is a great pity and it's a shame, but it doesn't damage international human rights. We have to believe in the importance of not only maintaining and upholding, but fighting back against those who don't have proper respect for human rights. And I'm conscious that I've spoken about two wars, and I just want to footnote there are other wars that we don't pay enough attention to. In Sudan, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Myanmar, terrible suffering, especially use of rape as a form of warfare, sexual violence in conflict. The number of children who are killed in armed conflict every year has been rising quite dramatically. But now I want to turn to the more positive story that I want to talk about, because I mentioned the International Criminal Court. I should also have mentioned the International Court of Justice, because the International Court of Justice has taken the case that South Africa brought forward under the Genocide Convention and has called for interim measures which are being ignored by Israel, again with no leverage used by the United States or those European countries that provide arms to respect what the court has said in that case. And we've had the advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice, a separate opinion, which reaffirmed the truth of international law, the truth that the occupation is unlawful, and that settlements are unlawful and that this should be upheld by countries. And again, that is not only not happening, but unfortunately, under this very right-wing government, Israel is almost poised and has been accused by some senior military figures in Israel itself of either crimes against humanity or illegal activity. Even within Israel, it's being realized that what is being proposed in northern Gaza to reoccupy and resettle is, in the circumstances, again, building, on, if I could put it, crime upon crime. But the International Court of Justice is today beginning a different case that some of you may have read about. I've known about this case from the very early stages because I loved how it began. You always kind of want to know, how did a case begin? And as a former lawyer, and I'm sure the chair of our committee would agree with this, you always want to know what started it, who had the courage maybe. This was a case started by law students in Vanuatu. Vanuatu is a tiny atoll in the Pacific, which is a grave threat because of rising sea levels. And these students got together and they were joined by other students in the Pacific and then in the Caribbean and around. And I met with them at earlier stages at COPs and at UN General Assemblies. I joined their appeal at that stage to the International Court of Justice. And how do you get to the International Court of Justice? Through a resolution of the General Assembly. And lo and behold, in 2023, they got a unanimous resolution of the General Assembly. Well, unanimous by consensus, but there was no dissent. And therefore, the International Court of Justice began the procedure of this advisory opinion, and there were written submissions. And today, the oral hearing has started, coinciding with our ceremony today. It will take some time because I think something like 100 states will want to, and maybe other parties will want to intervene. But the questions asked of the court are really very serious. For the first time, whether these greenhouse gas emissions are harming our ecosystems, our climate, and if so, what is the responsibility of member states for doing so? And it is possible that the court will do what the European Court of Human Rights has done, as you know, in what we call the Swiss grannies case. Again, I love that case because they're grannies like me that took the case. And it was the first time that an international court did find that protecting people from the effects of climate was protecting their human rights. And this is a really important step that hopefully will be taken. I think it will take probably some months. I'm told it could be the summer or late in the summer, maybe early August, when the advisory opinion of the court comes out. And of course it's an advisory opinion, so it could be that it will have an impact on national courts. More and more national courts are beginning to decide, and indeed even international courts. Under the law of the sea, the tribunal under the law of the sea decided a couple of months ago that the emissions that were affecting the oceans were pollutants that were causing harm. It was again a very good judgment by that tribunal. So courts are gradually doing their bit, and national courts, as we know, including the Irish Supreme Court, from time to time, they have also responded to cases. But I really admire the role of small island states, and in particular, as I said, these students, the Vanuatu students who started and the other students who joined them in getting this current advisory opinion of the International Court of Justice. Because I remember very well, I was the special envoy of the then UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon before the Paris Climate Agreement. when we arrived in Paris at the start of that conference, there was no agreement on what the goal would be. India in particular was protesting the possibility of mentioning 1.5 degrees, and other countries were hiding behind India, basically, which happens in international fora. And a high ambition coalition was formed. And the leader of that high ambition coalition was Tony de Brum, who was the foreign minister of the Marshall Islands, another small Pacific island. But he was a personality. And I remember, because I was sitting in on these ministerial meetings before Paris, he was a powerful voice. And he did keep saying over and over again, do you really want my country to no longer exist? Do you want us to have to migrate to another island and therefore no longer be a sovereign state? Is that what you want? Is that really what you want, that we'll no longer be a member of the United Nations, no longer able to participate in meetings like this? He was getting into their ear. So at the very start of the Paris, when we had no agreement, during that first week, a high ambition coalition, as I mentioned, was formed. The single goal of that high ambition coalition was to get the agreement about 1.5 degrees. And the importance of that was that the Paris Agreement asked the global scientists, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, what's the difference between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees? And what does it mean if we have to stay at 1.5 degrees? And just a couple of years later, and they've repeated this since then, the IPCC gave the advice that is still what climate scientists are saying, only they're saying it's happening sooner than we thought, alas. It's more worrying than we thought, alas. What they said was, between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees, bad things will probably happen. The coral reefs will probably disappear. They never say certainly. They're scientists. It's problematics, etc. The coral reefs will probably disappear. The Arctic ice will probably disappear. And the permafrost, and there's a great deal of permafrost around Siberia and in different places, will melt and throw up not just carbon, but methane, which in the short term is even more dangerous to us. So the scientists made it very clear the world should stay at or below 1.5 degrees. Now, many of you will see in our newspapers, because it's well covered here in Ireland, I'm glad to say, that we have actually touched the 1.5, more than touched it. In climate terms, we would have to do that for more than a decade to have breached it, if I could put it that way. But we can see we're getting close. And what do we need to do? We need to somehow change the dialogue about climate. I'm not going to talk about the current election, except to say it was a little bit reassuring that 50% of those canvassed in the opinion poll, the exit poll, half the population said that we weren't doing enough on climate. That gives me hope, because they're right. Maybe the other half will wake up, we'll hope for that. But how do we get more attention in a way that will galvanize people? And I think we do need a much more positive story, and I'm really going to end with this. I'm involved with a number of women leaders in what we call Project Dandelion, and I know I have a dandelion on me, but I don't know if you can see. Yeah, there it is. I can even show it under the gown. And we have launched a broad-based climate justice movement led by women leaders, but not women only. We are leading, and we have in fact galvanized all the women who are involved in women-led initiatives on climate. We're all coming together around the dandelion flower, or weed. Generally, I think we've thought of it as a weed. I certainly, when I was growing up, thought of it as a weed, but I now think of it as a beautiful flower. It grows on all continents. It's very resilient. You can't get rid of it if you want to, of course. But it's also got roots that regenerate the soil. You can eat or drink every part of the dandelion. And how do you spread it? You just blow. I'm very, affected by symbols. I'm aware that the great religions of the world use symbols all the time. Why? Because they know the power of the symbol. And I learned the power of the symbol through that light in the window that I put in Oras an Uachtaráin, because that light took on a life of its own. And I never, when we travelled, Nick and myself, on state visits or on working visits abroad, I never mentioned the light because I was always greeted with, we know you have a light in the window and it matters so much and we really appreciate it. And it created that sense of an Irish diaspora, and the policies then followed on that. So we're hoping that the dandelion, which is a nature symbol, the first thing that it does is remind us that we also are nature. We are of nature, we're not separate from nature, and we're at the moment undermining nature, undermining the ecosystems through the loss of biodiversity and the extinction of species that's going on, and that we need to regroup on that. But our story is a very positive one. It is that we're at the cusp of a clean energy, circular economy, healthy, safer, much better world. We're literally on the cusp of it. And we are actually moving, and even moving faster, because wind and solar and hydro, they're all becoming cheaper, and more and more countries are using them. There's more and more innovation, there's better battery retention, there's now moving to green hydrogen and other ways in which we can accelerate. But we're not moving fast enough for the science, because we're not moving the money. And that was what was a bit disappointing in the COP that I've just come from in Baku in Afghanistan, because it was about finance. And the whole point is, if we can switch from the way we spend the money at the moment, it's estimated we spend at least $1.8 trillion a year on what is harming us, namely subsidies for fossil fuel and bad land management. That figure comes from a business leaders group called the B Team of Business Leaders that I happen to belong to. I'm not a businesswoman, I'm their moral conscience, I think. But anyway, they estimate that. Think if we switched even half that figure or a third of that figure properly into incentivizing clean energy. We need to incentivize farmers. We need to incentivize everybody, because we can't afford to have any more delay. We actually do need to move very rapidly. I make no apology for using this platform, as I think I use every platform that I speak in now, in stressing the urgency of the moment, but also the possibility. It's a human problem to move faster. You move faster if you move the money. That's all you have to do. And therefore, we have to understand the two messages that I'm giving. One, that even in difficult times, international human rights must be supported, fought for, believed in, and help us to move forward. And secondly, we ourselves need to have a much more positive, powerful narrative that will move us more rapidly to have a safe world for our children and grandchildren. And when Nelson Mandela brought the elders together in 2007, he said, above all else, bring hope. And I've thought a lot about hope. And I learned from the first chair of the elders, who was a dear friend, Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I was on a panel with Archbishop Tutu, must be at least 20 years ago now, in New York, in front of young people. And when Archbishop Tutu's in front of young people, he would wave his arms and tell them how much he loved them and believed in them. And they loved it, of course, and there was a love in between both. And we were being moderated by an American journalist, and she said very sharply, Archbishop Tutu, why are you such an optimist? And he looked at her, and he said, oh no. He shook his head, and he said, oh no, I'm not an optimist. I'm a prisoner of hope. And, you know, when you think about his life, fighting apartheid, and then chairing the South African Commission on Apartheid that had to listen to the terrible stories and the realities that the country had gone through. And I remember him weeping in front of witnesses because he was so heartfelt about it. And yet, he was a prisoner of hope. And what he meant was, there may not be enough in the glass to say it's a glass half full, but whatever there is there, you work with it. You work with it, you partner, you build, you go forward, you make it better. And that, I think, is what we all have to do. We have to be prisoners of hope at this time where there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of difficulty. But actually, just by knowing that truth is on our side, that nature is on our side, that climate is on our side, that human rights are on our side, we will, of course, make progress. So, Gannairi Liv Galer, agus Gura Mila Mahagiv. Thank you.
I ask Dr. Orla Flynn, President of ATU, to make the closing address.
Cahirlach, a gweini úsla, cóglachacha, micléin agus a corda. Is mór na nórdom, is mór na nórdúing, bhean seom trónóna, ar an ócáid anspecialta seo. Lás dá rúla tán in Irach. Chair, distinguished guests, colleagues, students, friends, and a warm welcome home to you, Mrs. Dr. Robinson. Today is a very special moment in the maturing of ATU as a young, vibrant, and ambitious technological university. To have the authority, to have the power to confer an honorary doctorate, this is a new experience for us, a new power for us, and it's a power granted following the enactment of the 2018 Technological Universities Act. And we take the responsibilities associated with that power very seriously. So even though we will be celebrating our 3rd birthday next April, it's only now that we are recognizing our first awardees. We've chosen in 2024 for our first honorary doctorates to honor and recognize the achievement of 2 distinguished people, and today it's our great privilege to recognize the global contribution of the first female President of Ireland, Mrs. Mary Robinson. Sometimes, a couple of times in a lifetime if you're lucky, you're able to witness firsthand the emergence of a truly great leader, visionary in thought and deed, and brave in action. And just over 34 years ago, in 1990, we saw a real step forward towards a fairer, more just, more inclusive Ireland. And at that time, Mrs. Robinson's voice resonated with the people of Ireland throughout a difficult campaign. And Mrs. Robinson's voice, shining through her acceptance speech, still resonates hugely with us today, and it still continues to inspire. And those words will never be forgotten. The role of Manon Ahearn in daring to rock the system instead of rocking the cradle. And those words make us reflect today on the dark plight still faced by many of our sisters around the world. Mrs. Robinson's words on being a symbol of reconciliation as well as renewal, of commitment to pluralism and peace on this island, help us reflect on the enormous contribution that we in ATU can play in supporting peaceful and, yes, prosperous cross-border collaboration and engagement. And there's a role here for all technological universities and institutes of technology, and I'm really delighted that we're joined here today by 4 technological university and Institute of Technology presidents who are here with members of their senior leadership teams, as well as sectoral leadership in TIA. Ireland today is a very different country to 1990. And in her inauguration speech, Mrs. Robinson spoke about the sadness of exile and emigration, homelessness and unemployment. And I was thrilled that in her words of acceptance there, that she continues to talk about hope. And I'm going to quote from her words. Back in 1990, But as well as our immigrants abroad, we have exiles at home, all those who are at home but homeless, the poor, the sick, the old, the unemployed. To all those who have no voice or whose voice is weak, I say, take heart, there is hope. And in ATU, we have a big part to play in that message of hope. Back on the day when we became a technological university in April 2022, I spoke of supporting access and opportunity for all, and I reflected that ultimately we are an organisation of service. Our new strategic plan paints a vision for ATU of enhancing the quality of life in our region and creating a sustainable future for all. Dr. Robinson continues to lead the way and to energise us in that regard. And as we conclude our third season of graduations as ATU, I'm hugely proud of what we've achieved in less than 3 years, sometimes swimming against the tide, but we've achieved it together. Our university-wide community of staff, students and alumni, along with our partners and stakeholders, many of whom are with us here today. In 2024 alone, we have seen close to 5,000 graduates receiving major awards from our university. Those graduates will make a real difference in this world. I want to thank our chair and our governors for their ongoing support, as well as all the organisers, Ger Gavin and all the team from the Registrar's Office, the team in my own office, and special thanks to the team here in Mayo, Míle buíochas as an obair agru. And as I draw today's ceremony to a close, I think we have an opportunity on this historic day to renew our pledge to our students, to our wider region and globally. We will support you. We will give you opportunities. We will serve your needs and give you a brighter future. Your future, no matter your background or origin or circumstances, can be here. Go to Míle Magraibh.
Respected guests, our ATU community, our Honorary Doctorate recipient, ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the meeting for the purposes of conferring of an Honorary Doctorate upon Mary Robinson. I now request that you all to rise for the closing procession where the conferring party and invited guests leave the hall.